Roses are red, violets are blue. I'm a schizophrenic, and so am I. Name the movie. Welcome back to the Sober Cappy channel. And yeah, the voice is one of my favorite topics, for better or worse. And you may have heard me speak on it before, but I really want to get a little more in depth about it because, again, I do think it's a key factor. You know, when I explain the disorder and how I know, I suffer from it is that I do have this voice within me and that I don't really consider me. I basically consider myself a low-level schizophrenic, and heard a great quote from Edgar Tolle, the guy who wrote The Power of Now, that says, "What a liberation to realize that voice in my head is not me. Who am I then? I am the one who realizes that." And it's so true. Even serial killers say, they've got a voice in their head. One guy said, "I was a passenger in my own body." This was a serial killer. And, some may not like it. And I'm not comparing us to killers, but I am comparing us to having a similar type voice. It's obviously a lot worse in their case. It's a voice that actually compels them to kill. We're very lucky. This just compels us to drink. But to me, it's a very similar concept. I mean, that's how strong of a compulsion this is. And what I've never heard anyone else explain this as is that it is the voice of the neural pathway that we built up and dug so deeply and paved the trench that tells us that alcohol is the answer to everything. That neural pathway concept isn't new, but the explanation that that's what that voice is. That's what that is. And most neural pathways, if you do not use them, they will eventually wither and die. My belief in this case is that voice, it's a parasite. Every day that we don't drink, we get stronger. It gets weaker. It needs alcohol to thrive. And once it wilters, it needs it to reinvigorate. And that's why you can never drink again. You can never give that voice life again. I was talking to a buddy today whose wife is one of my people, and she talked about, that neural pathway I mentioned. The key to beating it is to build new ones, to do hard things sober, and essentially bury that old neural pathway. In her case, she said it's like building a new one next to it. So if you're in the forest and you've built this, you've dug this thing out and you've cleared all the trees and you've built this, weathered in path. And as I said, you practically brought in a truck and paved right over it. Well, then you're going to build a new one, essentially adjacent to it. And her analogy, which was great, is, first it's going to be very hard to walk that path. There's going to be crap everywhere. And then every day, as you do that hard walk, it's going to get a little more, cleared out till eventually you've dug yourself a super deep and paved path right next to it. And meanwhile, that old one, all the forest has grown back in all over it. Now, what I say is the only thing that doesn't go away is that pavement down below it. There's a part of us that always knows that pavement's down there and that it wouldn't be all that difficult to resurrect that path. So, and my buddy who doesn't have the disorder, but he believes, that can go away for life. Debatable. There's definitely a point I'm at it where alcohol is off the table, is absolutely not part of my life. But that doesn't mean there's not times when that voice still might rear its head a little bit. It senses weakness. It'll pounce on it, on vulnerability. And, it'll just throw ideas in your head. I say another reason I know that voice isn't us is because that voice is the best salesman in the world. It does not take no for an answer. And most of us are not the best salespeople in the world, except when it comes to that voice within us. And, it's a 1 second decision, a series of 1 second decisions to drink, and it's, if you got to, in the moment, stand up to it. I like to say to tell it to F off out loud for as many times as it takes. Some people don't want to do that. They don't want to be negative on themselves in sobriety, but I think this quote helps give permission to be negative just to that voice, which again isn't us. I actually heard another great thing recently with a person that actually tried to negotiate it. Wanted to have a drink before dinner, but said, hey, and it's funny because she had never recognized the voice before. And she said, I finally heard the voice you people are all talking about. And she said to it, hey, let's have dinner. If you still want to have a drink after dinner, you can do that. And then after dinner, just said, hey, how about we just go to bed now? But that's such a key to this process. I'm calling it pillow to pillow. If you can just make it to the pillow, even if it's 4 p.m, if you can take some Benadryl, melatonin, whatever, and just get to bed. Anyway, but that is why it's so key. Anytime, you slip, and slips happen, and they can be learning. Ultimately, the learning is reminding us it just doesn't work for us anymore. So, I've now kind of evolving my theory to say, I'm going to continue to talk to this voice, educate this voice, because the voice thinks it's protecting us. Remembers a time when alcohol essentially did work for us in terms of being our friend in the loneliness, or maybe helping us survive a horrible trauma or horrible moment, or even just stifling nerves, anxiousness, etc. So educate that voice. Does not work for us anymore. It's in a lot of ways it actually never did, but that's another story for another day. But, and then I like to say that as you do hard things sober and build new neural pathways, I like to say there's a new voice in town. And that new voice will remind you that alcohol does not work for us anymore, and that you can do hard things sober. What got me to drink, I've talked about, I'd gone 3.5 years, and the voice had become quiet. I say it didn't dare ask me to drink again. I think it was my own voice that after 3.5 years, I was leading a bit of a mundane existence because I quit on my own. I hadn't really done the work, and so I hadn't really achieved emotional sobriety. And I think it was more, in this case, my own voice that just said, you know what, you've learned your lesson. I think you can try drinking normally again. You're going to control yourself this time because you don't want to go back to those old habits and get back in all the same predicaments you got in, right? So, as I said in my initial intro video, I did it one night during a dinner date, had a couple drinks, and you know what? It turns out I could drink normally. But guess what? Not for long. And that's the case with all of us. Once our reward system is changed, it can never go back. Again, a story for another discussion. So, surprisingly, I mentioned when you relapse after, say, 3.5 years in my case, it's actually harder to get sober again. That voice comes back with a vengeance. You pick up where we left off with our drinking. It doesn't go back to day one when we first took that drink. This is a progressive disorder. And some even say it not only picks up where we left off, but there's an added on value of the years it has progressed while we were in recovery. That's something I need to research further. But there's also something I just recently learned about called abstinence violation effect, which can lead to more serious consequences, such as more extreme behavior during a relapse, because we do feel so let down having violated our abstinence of this. So relapsing is so dangerous. It can literally mean your life, and I know that firsthand from acquaintances. So yet another reason why, we can never, the biggest lie, that voice will tell us so many lies to get us to drink. The biggest one will tell us is just for today, just for today. You just want to numb out just for tonight. It's like an analogy I gave about, just a sip, just for a minute, just to see how it feels. We can never give in to that. Because first of all, it's the ultimate lie. Because in almost all cases, it never is just for one night. Because we do feel so much shame, etc. So unless you're in the throes, I do know people that are actively doing the work, showing up in meetings, therapy, etc. They may still have a slip. They show back up the next day. They talk about it and they get on the horse much quicker. But even in those cases, that voice gets reignited, and it makes it that much harder to fight off. Probably the best quote I've ever heard in sobriety is from a woman that said, "Why do I keep doing the hard part over and over again?" And that's so true. So if you haven't drank today, if you ideally haven't drank for a while, don't ever try drinking again. You'll never have to do that hard part again. You'll never have to get sober again. And you're on your way to enjoying your life. Sure, I got more to say that I'll add to the overtime. But I guess closing thought is this is not a life sentence. To me, the only thing we're stuck with for life is that voice. Again, it shrivels up and it can only be reignited with alcohol. So it's almost like having a disease where you're told, what if someone did tell you, hey, you got a disease, it can go into permanent remission as long as you don't take another drop of alcohol. You take that deal in a minute. So the key is you got to stay sober, stay patient, and by default, you'll stay strong. So that's it. Please like, share, subscribe, and as always, stronger, sober. Thanks. You might recall that quote at the beginning, roses are red, violets are blue. I'm a schizophrenic and so am I. That's from What About Bob? Great movie. But that concept, allowed me that I'm a low-level schizophrenic, really allowed me to accept that that voice isn't me, to talk to it. For me, it worked to tell it out loud, to fuck off. I don't like to swear, but it really worked for that. It worked for others. I used to say it on shares all the time. I don't do it as much anymore. I should. I also like the alternative concept of trying to negotiate with it, because you know what? It hit me. That voice is like my friend Matt. It's a know-it-all. And in this case, it thinks alcohol is the answer to everything. So we do need to re-educate it, and we can't help fuel it, again, by drinking again, and also by drinking normally, which is often the case when we slip. That first night, that second night, we've learned our lesson, we drink normally, and that only gives it credence to it saying, yes, see, you can do this. But no, we can't. Moderation only works for those who don't need to try to moderate. So you can't do it. And then I also forgot to say that, along the lines of that killer that said, hey, I was a passenger in my own body. I thought that the Massachusetts woman had postpartum that killed her 3 children and jumped out a window. And she had sent her husband out to pick up food. She knew she was going to do it. But that voice, my mind, had already made up her mind for her, as I always say. And it's the same thing with us. That's why often we don't call a friend when we know we're on the verge of slipping, because that voice has already made up our mind. And a concept, I think of as when we vow we're not going to drink that day, and all of a sudden we find ourselves in the liquor store. It's like an out-of-body experience. It's like being hypnotized. We know we're doing it, but there's nothing we can do to stop it. And that's how this works. But the way to stop it is by breaking the cycle, doing the work, getting stronger every day, standing up to that voice, re-educating it, and never reigniting it by ever drinking again. Just like a celiac has to accept they can never eat gluten again, we need to accept this reality. Could be a lot worse. We truly are the luckiest in many ways. See you next time.